Good morning, everyone. Glad you're joining us today for our continued study in Ecclesiastes. Today, we're going to hit some hyperdrive and cover a lot of ground. Ecclesiastes is, in parts, just sort of a scattershot book. It's like walking into a general store, and there are so many things on the wall that you could pull down, just all sorts of things. And we're about to hit a section of Ecclesiastes that's like that, that not so much this week, but even into next week, we'll begin to read sort of like Proverbs, in that there's one sentence or one verse, pithy wisdom there. And so we're going to try to tie that together. Today's lesson, we're going to cover a little more than 2 chapters today. They're brief chapters, but there are multiple themes, but there's a nice little bow at the end as well. So today, if you have your Bible with you, I encourage you to find Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Pardon me. We're going to pick up in verse 13. And we're going to go all the way through the end of chapter 6. Now, there's only 12 verses in chapter 6, so it's not as rip-roaring adventurous as it sounds. But it still is quite a few verses. So I'm going to read these in sections as we go. So let's start with chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king, who will no longer take advice. One can indeed come out of prison to reign, even though born poor in the kingdom. I saw all the living who, moving about under the sun, follow that youth who replaced the king. There was no end to all those people whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also vanity and a chasing after the wind. So the primary theme of this little section of verses is that age is deceptive. A young person may have more wisdom than a foolish king who is older. So this is really about the vanity of looking up to people because of either age or position. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't respect our elders or respect people in authority, but it is the observation that just because you age doesn't mean you have wisdom, and just because you are in a position, whether elected or placed or employed or by default, however you got there, doesn't mean that you're worthy of respect just because you're there. This is the point that the author of Ecclesiastes is trying to make. We can all think of examples of foolish kings or rulers in the Bible and throughout history. This is not a far-fetched idea for us. There is the notion that people rise to the level of their incompetence, a business principle. And certainly we see that happen throughout history and in our own observations, in the workplace maybe, or in government, or in wherever around us. Notice the definition of foolish here, though. I think this is interesting. The foolish king will not take advice. This is one little phrase, but I think it seals up the whole deal because the author of Ecclesiastes is really focused on foolishness versus wisdom. And one part of the ingredient of being a fool is not to take advice, not to listen to other people, to only consider your own counsel and think that you know the best in all circumstances. That generally doesn't work out so hot. Okay, I can't read my notes here. Okay. This little phrase here, it's an interesting phrase about someone may come out of prison to reign. And that certainly has an echo of the Joseph story from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew Scriptures as well. Remember Joseph being imprisoned by Pharaoh, Potiphar. Anyhow, being in prison and then ultimately coming to a position of authority as well. When it says here at the end, yet those who come later will not rejoice in even this good ruler. This is a sober reminder that even a good leader, those who come after that leader, may not honor or remember that leader. And if you think about the passages we've covered in the last few weeks, this is another recurring theme of the author of Ecclesiastes, that we cannot count on our legacy enduring beyond us. So there is an immediacy, there's a living in the now that's important to the author of Ecclesiastes here. I forgot to say at the beginning, if you have questions about each of these sections or comments, please type them in and I'll address those as we go. We've got multiple things to cover today, and if we need to circle back at some point, we certainly can. Look now, if you would. Oh, here we go. Yeah, Dave, that is very, very true. Wisdom is not, okay, come on, show me the whole thing. Yeah, wisdom is not an inborn ability. You must nurture some specific skills and accumulate experience over the years. Yeah, no, Dave, you're right about that. I do think we see that some people, think about that saying, she is wise beyond her years. And we do see that some people have a seemingly innate ability to think well. They've got good analytical skills. And certainly that can get honed, and certainly that can be taught as well. But it also requires an aptitude and a willingness. And that's going to play into something that comes up in a few verses as well, a willingness to do that. Thank you, Dave. Excellent point, indeed. Let's look at chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than the sacrifice offered by fools, for they do not know how to keep from doing evil. Never be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you upon earth. Therefore let your words be few. For dreams come with many cares, and a fool's voice with many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay fulfilling it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Here's this again. Fulfill what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger, meaning the temple messenger probably, that it was a mistake, what you vowed. Why should God be angry at your words and destroy the work of your hands? With many dreams come vanities and a multitude of words, but fear God. Now, this section is about speech and vows, promises that someone might make to God. The author says, when you come into the temple, it is better to listen than to speak. And this gives us a reminder of, in the Gospels, when Jesus is critical of the Pharisees who come to the temple in Jerusalem and have lofty prayers and put on a big show for their piety, but he says that they are actually dead on the inside. That they are not what they appear to be, because they're all words, or as we would say here in Texas, all hat and no cattle. This is the idea behind this, even in Ecclesiastes. I love this line, the sacrifice offered by fools. This is a beautiful description of people who just run at the mouth and do not know what they're saying, are not thinking about what they're saying. This is about empty words. This is about making unrealistic vows. This is about going to worship in the wrong spirit. This is about going to the temple out of selfishness to build yourself up in that experience so that you can be seen or that you can be heard and people will draw attention to you. And even the author of Ecclesiastes says this is foolishness. This is not what this is about. There's a particular emphasis here on this notion of vows. Now, we don't think so much today, hello Mary Kay, we don't think so much today about going to church and making vows, except for maybe a wedding or a child dedication or some other spiritual commitment that's one of those big banner days, right? But in this context, the author of Ecclesiastes is talking about anytime people go and make a promise to God to do something. And what he's saying is, it is better to underpromise and overperform than to overpromise and underperform. It's better, he says, to say nothing at all than to make a vow that you cannot keep. Don't overpromise, he says. And there's a connection here to some of the earlier ideas. In speech, your mouth will lead you to sin, and God takes no pleasure in fools. And yet, he seems to be drawing a parallel with those who go to the temple to act the fool. And typically, they're the ones who don't know they're the fool. And again, this is all very understandable to us. We get this. We understand this. There is a problem, though. If you look at verse 6 of chapter 5, this seems to be built around the idea of a fairly vengeful God. Look at that verse again. Why should God be angry at your words and destroy the work of your hands? This seems to indicate a belief that God will take vengeance upon you if you do the wrong thing. We have to consider this from the viewpoint of the writer and in the time that it was written. And we have to also consider it within the larger context of Scripture. We don't read this in isolation. And certainly we know that the writer of this book is often espousing what appears to be a view of sort of predestination or righteousness versus wrath that we have trouble with. So I struggle with this on one hand, but then I also want to look at it in the larger context of this. But the big message of it is, regardless of God's wrath or not, it is stupid, it is foolish to go to the temple and run your mouth with things that you don't need to be saying, and to make vows that you know you cannot keep. And boy, that is a lesson for us too, in so many ways. I'll let you sort of unpack that for yourself so that I don't step on everyone's toes in this and have to be confessional as well. Don't want to do that. Questions or comments about that before we move on to the next section? Anyone? Okay, yeah, good comment, Dave. I'm going to keep my notes straight here. All right. Let's look at verses 8 through 20 in chapter 5. If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and right, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But all things considered, this is an advantage for a land, a king for a plowed field. The lover of money will not be satisfied with money, nor the lover of wealth with gain. This also is vanity. When goods increase, those who eat them increase. And what gain has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of laborers, whether they eat little or much. But the surfeit, or the abundance is another way to say that, of the rich will not let them sleep. There is a grievous ill that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owners to their hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. Though they are parents of children, they have nothing in their hands. As they came from their mother's womb, so shall they go again. Naked as they came, they shall take nothing for their toil, which they may carry away with their hands. This also is a grievous ill. Just as they came, so shall they go. And what gain do they have from toiling for the wind? Besides, all their days they eat in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and resentment. Verse 18, this is what I have seen to be good. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of the life God gives us. For this is our lot. Likewise, all to whom God gives wealth and possessions, and whom he enables to enjoy them, and to accept their lot and find enjoyment in their toil, this is the gift of God. For they will scarcely brood over the days of their lives, because God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts. So this is a comparatively long section that we've just read here with about 13 verses, all focused on the love of money. And again, we can tie this to New Testament teachings. We can tie this to the teachings of Jesus about money. These things really do line up very well. But what's helpful to notice is that this entire section on the love of money in verse 8 begins with a comment about injustice. This whole discussion of money is set around the issue of justice and right. And the author says, do not be amazed when you see oppression. Do not be amazed when you see economic oppression, because this is the way of the world, he says. This is the way things happen. And I want us to keep that idea in mind as we talk about the other issues on money here. The reference to the king in these first passages really are about taxation. And the idea here is that, yes, the king in these times has the ability to levy a tax upon the peasants and upon the people that the king rules, but the king does so ultimately at his own peril, because if they are not able to be productive and live good lives, neither is the king, because there is an economic ecosystem as such that even the king is dependent upon keeping that in balance. That's sort of the underlying message to this part. But the big idea here is, to borrow a phrase, you just can't get no satisfaction out of this. And this is an age-old truth that money will not give us the satisfaction we think it will. Thinking we will ever be satiated or satisfied is vanity, the author says, because acquisition sparks the desire for more acquisition. The more we have, the more we think we need. And I think we all understand this reality, because so many of us at some point in our lives have said, once I achieve X, I'll be content. Or once I have Y, I'll be set for life. And how many of us have reached those markers and said, oh yeah, that's it, I'm done. I don't need to accumulate anything else. There are a few people that have that discipline, but not many. And what we see, particularly with the accumulation of wealth, is that the more you accumulate, the more you want, the more you think you need, because there's always a higher authority. There's always someone with more than you. There's always someone you still aspire to be. Always someone on the other side of the wall that you want to catch up with along the way. And because of this, the author says, with riches comes worry. The rich worry about protecting their assets. Therefore, he says, the poor sleep better because they have less to protect along the way. Yeah, how much is enough? The answer is more. And always more. I'm trying to think of an example of someone I've met along life's way who has said, I've got everything I'll ever need. I have met a few people like that, but I could count them on my fingers and have fingers left over. It just does not typically happen that way. In verse 13, moving forward in this portion, this is advice really against asset hoarding. The author of Ecclesiastes, as he has said before, again, we're getting a theme here. Enjoy what God has given you and share it while you are living. The joy, meaning not the vanity in the author's terms. Vanity is thinking you're going to keep storing up, and never spend. I would say that vanity in Texas is the rainy day fund that the legislature keeps piling up into massive riches and never, in my experience, has ever spent a dime of, even when we have huge crises going on. Think about that on an individual level as well. There is a limit to what any reasonable person needs to accumulate. And the author of Ecclesiastes says, you're going to have a better life. You're going to enjoy the life God has given you if you spend those resources wisely, even while you're living, rather than just save them up and be a Scrooge. Okay. All right, George, let me expand your comment here. Yeah, we can always find something we want. That's certainly true. Now, this whole thing is a variation on the old saw that you can't take it with you. Because what the author of Ecclesiastes says is everyone's going to die, and none of these assets that you've accumulated are going to make it through with you at that point. Again, it's a variation on an old theme here. In the midst of all this, though, look at verse 18, because we have here a really positive statement. This is what I've seen to be good. If you think the author of Ecclesiastes is only negative, here's a positive. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of the life God gives us, for this is our lot. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment. This is a reminder that some of us need who are so focused on doing the task that we find no enjoyment in doing the task. This is another way of thinking about this. Now, there is a problem in this passage in the next few verses. Beginning in chapter 5:19 and extending through chapter 6, verse 2, which we didn't read yet. So let me just reread this. I'm going to expand this for a minute. Okay? So beginning in 5:19. Likewise, all to whom God gives wealth and possessions and whom he enables, there's the key word, to enjoy them and to accept their lot and find enjoyment in their toil, this is the gift of God. For they will scarcely brood over the days of their lives because God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts. Then moving on to chapter 6. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy upon humankind, those to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that they lack nothing of all that they desire. Yet God does not, and here's the word again, enable them to enjoy these things, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity, a grievous ill. Well, what does this mean by God enabling? This seems to have a pretty strong predestinarian slant to it, that God enables some people to enjoy their wealth, and God does not enable other people to enjoy their wealth. This is not just about the haves and the have-nots. This is a division among the haves. And this might really cause us to pause and scratch our head and say, does God really operate the world this way? I want to propose that a key to understanding this phrase, the gift of God, is that one who sees their accumulation, their wealth, as a gift of God will enjoy life more than one who does not acknowledge God as the source of that gift. We are not enabled when we deny God's role in what we have, the riches that we have, however meager or great they may be. The enabling, I think, in reality, is an attitude on our part that God enables those who acknowledge God's blessing, and God does not enable those who deny God's blessing in this. I've got two illustrations to give you of this truth. I heard on the radio yesterday an interview with an entrepreneur who was asked about this large business that she had created and been very successful at, that started from scratch with an idea. She was asked, how much of your success is luck and how much of it is skill? And she thought about it for just a moment and said she thinks maybe 20% was luck. And she gave this illustration then. She said, you might be dealt a card that's a good card, but you still have to know how to play the card right. And I found myself listening to that and saying, okay, but is that really is the skill of playing the good hand you've been dealt really 80% of the equation? To me, that seems like getting the good deal at the card table is more than 20% of the thing. And then I thought, what about people who can't even get a seat at the card table to be dealt any cards? What she was speaking from was the very definition of privilege, to assume that because she had a seat at the table and was able to be dealt a good card, that it was her skill that allowed her to play that card. There is so much more to it than that, as we know from our study of the way the world works. And this is a lack of humility to say that God has blessed this person with this, not only with the wealth, but with the opportunity to make that investment and to do well, to succeed. There is an independence. This is like when people say they just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And very few people actually pull themselves up completely by their own bootstraps, because most of the time someone else has helped them get the boot, and someone else has helped them do the reaching along the way. It just doesn't happen that way as much as we think. And then the second illustration is a conversation I had recently with a couple, a very lovely couple, who've been blessed financially, and they're helping other people. Which is good. They're contributing to Christian enterprises and so forth. Not necessarily the ones I would contribute to, but their heart is in the right place on that. But they still have a very poorly formed understanding of how privileged they are in this life. And the danger here is assuming that others are experiencing life as you are experiencing it. There is a danger in assuming that just because you have access, because you have the ability to fill in the blank, do such and such a thing, to assume that other people have that same privilege, when in fact, many do not. This all goes back to this idea of how God enables people to enjoy their wealth or their position or their resources. When they acknowledge that God is the source of that, that creates a humility that makes everything go down better. Does this make sense? Let's see. Yeah, George, I'm going to expand your comment here. Right. I'm reminded, we have research year after year that shows that lower income people give a higher percentage of their assets to charity to help other people than the highest income people. Now, granted, the highest income people in America may give millions of dollars because they have millions of dollars. But when you look at it as percentage, we see that actually lower income people and middle income people tend to be more generous proportionately. Okay? Now, the same fate, I think, awaits us all. There is a recurring theme that happens here. Now, I have gotten ahead of myself here. Okay, now let's pick up in, we read through verse 2, chapter 6. Let's pick up in chapter 6, verse 3. A man may beget 100 children and live many years. But however many are the days of his years, if he does not enjoy life's good things or has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. That's pretty harsh. For it comes into vanity and goes into darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to one place. All human toil is for the mouth, yet the appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage have the wise over fools? And what do the poor have who know how to conduct themselves before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This also is vanity and a chasing after the wind. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what human beings are, and that they are not able to dispute with those who are stronger. The more words, the more vanity. So how is one the better? For who knows what is good for mortals while they live the few days of their vain life, which they pass like a shadow? For who can tell them what will be after them under the sun? Well, I think what we have here is a series of summations. Yes, thank you, Paul, for that testimony. That's really a wonderful word of helping. We were visiting last night with Luke's in-laws, the Corsons, who are members at Wilshire, and Mike is in the process of heading into retirement. He's got some more free time, and I asked him what he was doing with it, and he gave me this long list of things he's volunteering for, and one of those is the food pantry. And Terry, though she's still working full-time, has just got so tired of being cooped up with the pandemic, she said, I have to get out and do something, and she started driving for Meals on Wheels. And there are so many ways that we can make a difference. And that's a really good point, Paul. Thank you, Orleys. Thank you for that. We're returning here to several themes that are just sort of one-shot reminders. And there's a bit of a recapitulation here. Chapter 6, verse 7 is about the inability to be satisfied, to be satiated. Chapter 6, verse 8 is the reminder of the dichotomy between the wise and the foolish. Chapter 6, verse 9 is about seeing versus wandering desire. Verse 10 is about the certainty of the way life plays out, which leads to the author's view of vanity. Verse 11 is a caution against, again, too many words, talking more than listening, speaking more than taking in along the way. Verse 12 is a reminder that there's no guarantee for what happens here after you're gone. You can try to set up everything the way you want, and there's no guarantee that's going to happen. All of these themes, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 6 of them there. All of them are reminders, they're recapitulations of things we've already heard in the book of Ecclesiastes. They're all just recirculating through here. Ecclesiastes is a bit like a symphony that keeps returning to its main theme and several motifs over and over again. So an easy way to think about this is if you think about Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, everyone knows that, right? And if you listen to the entire symphony, you know that that major motif occurs over and over and over again throughout the piece. So that the music goes different ways and other things happen, but then we keep hearing a return to that theme. And there are also some sub-themes that get replayed multiple times as well. As is true of most classical symphonies, you may have an A theme and a B theme or even a C theme, and these things keep recurring as the theme is developed. That's the way the book of Ecclesiastes is. So I want to bring you back to our very first lesson out of Ecclesiastes, where we talked about key words to be paying attention to in this book. And there are 5 of them. And as I recall them to you, I think you will see that each one of these words appears in today's lesson and is a thread back through all the other lessons as well. The first key word is all. The author often says, all is vanity, or all is this. There's an all-encompassing nature to this. The second word is that, vanity. Very favorite word of this author in this book. Foolishness is another way to think of it. The third word is toil. We saw that in these passages about the toil that we do under the sun. The fourth word that recurs throughout Ecclesiastes is wisdom. We saw that in today's passage as well. And the fifth word is fate. We may not see that word particularly in English as it comes across, but the idea of fate or destiny plays very big throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, and we can see that even in today's lesson. Okay, I'm going to pause for a minute, and I want to hear your questions or comments about these things in today's lesson. What thoughts do you have to offer us about this? Anyone? Eager to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, we'll have radio silence. There's plenty to choose from in today's lesson among the different themes. And I don't expect any of us will walk away humming every theme, but choose one that sticks with you from today and maybe carry that through this. The reminder that many people do live without water and power. Again, when we live with access to these things, we assume that other people have them as well. And Judith, you're right. one big idea from the author of Ecclesiastes is to live in the moment, to be present here in the now. Yeah. Yeah, if the things on you, not good, George. I think that would fit with what the author of Ecclesiastes is saying as well. I think you all are getting the point out of this. Any other comments before we move? Let me just say, the tyranny of possessions is a cruel fate. That's a good proverb. Yeah, you could put that on a plaque and hang it on the wall. It's so true. Yeah, absolutely. The tyranny of possessions is a cruel fate. Yeah, I've for years used the phrase to describe someone who's in a miserable job that they hate, but they can't afford to quit, as having golden handcuffs. And that's, I think, an idea that comes out of Ecclesiastes as well. Yeah. So next week, we're going to pick up with chapter 7. And just a reminder, when you start looking ahead at chapter 7, you're going to feel like you're reading Proverbs, because it's just a series of one-verse sayings, as sort of a miscellany. And then there's another section that sort of brings stuff together, and then there's another miscellany after that. So we'll deal with as much of that as we can next week. Okay, Mary Kay. I think we must ask God to enable us and ensure God that we will use the enabling to bring about God's kingdom on earth. Well said. I think that's certainly in line with what the author of Ecclesiastes is saying. And Jim, why are the poor more apt to seek God? Well, why are the sick more apt to seek out a physician? Right? Because those who know they can't be self-sufficient, who know that they must be dependent upon a higher power, upon God, are the ones who are most prone to do that. The comparable illustration is, I was talking to someone who has a colleague who got very, very ill recently and had no access to a primary care doctor because this person had refused to go to the doctor for multiple years because there just was no need to, right? And yet when the need arose, there was nothing there because of this belief in self-sufficiency. And I think that gets to the idea here that we've got to live our lives knowing that we can't always take care of ourselves. And we are not back to John Donne, that famous line, no man is an island unto himself. Yeah. Okay, well, that's it for today. I thank you for joining us. Watch for prayer updates coming out from Charlene this afternoon that will give you an update on that. As a reminder, we will not have class on Easter Sunday. There are 3 outdoor services at the church on Easter Sunday. And because of the timing of that, Sunday school wasn't going to work real well with that. So we will have a class on Palm Sunday, but we will not have a class on Easter Sunday. Let's pray together as we close. Lord, hear our prayers with gratitude for your guidance and your enabling of us. We pray that you would help us to use wisely the resources and riches you have given us. For the glory of your kingdom, we pray. Amen. Bye, y'all.